Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited about our topic today. We're going to talk about what the Ohio SILC, the Ohio Statewide Independent Living Council, is, a Center for Independent Living, or a SIL, and Services for Independent Living, or SIL. So many acronyms. Our presenters today are Jeremy Morris, who is the Executive Director of the Ohio Statewide Independent Living Council, or Ohio SILC, or OSILC, as you will hear today many times. Our second speaker is Lisa Marn. She is the PCA LTSS Coordinator at Services for Independent Living. And I myself am Jackie Stromberg, and I am also with Services for Independent Living, and I'm the PCA Communications Coordinator. Before we get started, we'll go over a few housekeeping rules. All participants will be muted during the webinar. If you do have questions, please enter them in the questions box, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So enter them as you go while you think of them, that's fine. We'll touch base with them at the end of the webinar. We are recording today's webinar, and the recording will be available on Services for Independent Living's website and our YouTube channel, as you can see on the screen, www.sil-oh.org is our website. When the webinar is over, a satisfaction survey will pop up on your screen. We really appreciate your feedback. We like to know how we're doing, and if there are any other topics of interest that we could facilitate a webinar on, we'd appreciate it. For those of you that are licensed social workers or independent social workers or social work assistants, you can get one CEU for today's webinar. At the bottom of the survey is a question asking you if you'd like a CEU. So please check yes and enter your license number, and we will get that CEU out to you. Please keep in mind it will take us 3 to 4 days to get that certificate out to you, so don't panic if you don't get it right away, but you'll have it by the end of the week, so please be patient with us. Lastly, there are several handouts available, so please download those. One being Jeremy's presentation, a second one being the Ohio Independent Living Program brochure, and the last one being Services for Independent Living's program brochure. So download those and keep those handy. And if everyone is ready, we will go ahead and turn it over to Jeremy, I hope, here. And Jeremy, you are on.
Perfect. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Jackie said, my name is Jeremy Morris. I'm the director of the Ohio Statewide Independent Living Council, or Ohio SILC. So today I am going to start off and give a little bit of background and talk to you about the Statewide Independent Living Council and the general makeup of Centers for Independent Living. With that, of course, what would it be if I didn't start with some acronyms that I will try not to use throughout the presentation, but if I do, I apologize. I will try and catch myself. So the first is SILC, SILC, or the Statewide Independent Living Council. SIL, Center for Independent Living. DSE, which is the designated state entity. And another acronym, in Ohio, our designated state entity is Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, or OOD. The Administration for Community Living is ACL, and SPIL, SPIL, is the State Plan for Independent Living. So starting off, we're going to go and talk a little bit about the background. And something I like to begin these presentations with when we're talking about why the statewide independent living councils and centers for independent living exist, looking at what the purpose of the federal law actually says. So in the federal law, the purpose of independent living is stated as the purpose of Title VII of the Act is to promote a philosophy of independent living, including a philosophy of consumer control, peer support, self-help, self-determination, equal access, and individual and systems advocacy in order to maximize the leadership, empowerment, independence, and productivity of individuals with disabilities, and to promote the integration and full inclusion of individuals with disabilities into the mainstream of American society. That right there is the purpose that brings everyone in the independent living network together. So all of the state councils across the country, every center for independent living across the country, this is the purpose that we all exist under. And as I said, this is part of the Rehabilitation Act. So this is actually part of federal law. The Rehabilitation Act itself currently has the Modern Vocational Rehabilitation Program, which was included in 1973. The Rehabilitation Act also includes Section 504, which was the first anti-discrimination law for people with disabilities. And this was a section of the Rehabilitation Act that provided that any federally funded programs must be accessible to individuals with disabilities. Within the Rehabilitation Act, there were a couple different time periods when things changed for the independent living program. So in 1978, that is when Centers for Independent Living were first funded with federal funds. In 1986, that's when consumer control became part of the Centers for Independent Living. In 1992, importantly for me as a staff of the Statewide Independent Living Council, that's when we came into existence. It also is when the presumptive eligibility came into place, allowing consumers to self-identify for their eligibility for independent living services. It established Section 723 of the Rehabilitation Act, and it required consumer control boards for Centers for Independent Living, which I will talk about in a little bit. In 1998, the Rehabilitation Act became part of WIA as Title, I'm not great with Roman numerals, I'm sorry, Title IV. In 2014, WIOA, it established the Independent Living Administration at the federal level, and it moved independent living from the Department of Education into the Department of Health and Human Services under the Administration for Community Living. So in 2014, our federal home moved from one federal agency to another. So now the Centers for Independent Living and the independent living programs exist within the same federal entity that a lot of the developmental disability programs, the traumatic brain injury programs, and the aging programs exist under. So going back to 1978, This is when the federal government first funded centers for independent living. So there were a couple centers across the country who were initially funded, and they were kind of the pioneers of centers for independent living as things got moving. Here in Ohio, there is a little bit of I'll say controversy. It's kind of a fun controversy now of what center was first. Because if you look at when a center is officially federally recognized, that is when they receive a federal grant. And that was Services for Independent Living. Although, if you ask down in Cincinnati, they will tell you that they were the first center for independent living because they were the first center for independent living to incorporate as a nonprofit and start operating. So Services for Independent Living beat them to the federal grant. So there's that little bit of fun rivalry of who was first in Ohio. So when we talk about the Centers for Independent Living themselves, there are some main things that it's important for you to remember. The centers are non-residential, so they do not provide housing. They are not allowed to provide housing, and that's something that is a common misconception. They are all their own private nonprofit corporations. So every center for independent living in the country must be their own 501c3 nonprofit organization. So here in Ohio, we do have 12 centers for independent living. So there are 12 individual nonprofits. They are not government entities. They are not state-run entities. So that makes the centers a little bit different when we talk about how a federal program is being implemented. As I said earlier, they are consumer controlled. For Centers for Independent Living, this does mean that the majority of their board of directors, so the individuals who are actually making the decisions on how the organization is going to be moving forward, providing the guidance and assistance of planning and preparing for the budget for all aspects of what the center is going to be doing. A majority of those members must be individuals with significant disabilities. Centers are also required to have a majority of their staff be individuals with disabilities. So this creates organizations across the country that are run by and for people with disabilities. It's one of the very unique things that gives a lot more power to what the centers are doing, because an individual can come to a center for independent living and find somebody that has some shared life experience with them. It allows the centers to provide more responsive services, better support, and that peer support element that centers are required to provide in allowing individuals to have somebody with that shared life experience to talk with. So as I said, yes, the centers provide services and advocacy by and for individuals with all types of disabilities. So the centers are required to provide a range of services to all disabilities. It is not limited to any particular type of disability. It must be a cross-disability focus. And the goal that relates directly to that purpose statement that I read earlier is for individuals with disabilities to live, work, and participate in their communities. So Centers for Independent Living and the State Independent Living Council, we work together on a lot of things, and here I'll go into a little bit more detail around some of that. So the Centers for Independent Living, they are required to provide the core independent living services. They can provide additional independent living services that are consistent with state and federal law. They must comply with the federal standards, assurances, and indicators. So there are those set requirements that every Center for Independent Living must maintain. That includes things like having the consumer-controlled board and a majority of staff with disabilities. There's a lot of other elements that the centers, every one of them has to follow. They work to help develop the state plan for independent living with us, the Statewide Independent Living Council. So every 3 years that plan is created, and the center directors are actually part of that process because every one of them is invited to sign agreeing to the state plan for independent living, and we must have a majority of the centers that sign on to approve that state plan. The centers must also conduct their own resource development activities. And what that means is, in the federal law, it's actually required that centers must be trying to find additional funding and revenue streams to support and grow their own programs. They really wanted it to be a model that a center was able to grow and expand within their own communities. And the centers, they have to work with us as the council on that 3-year state plan, but each one has to have their own annual and 3-year program and financial planning objectives. So every center has to create their own ideas and their objectives of what they want to accomplish in their own local communities. So that's an important thing for everyone to understand, that you potentially have a voice. If there's things that you see in your community, if there's issues that you see, you have a consumer controlled organization that you can go to and talk about these issues that you see. You can address some of these things with them and possibly work on advocacy related things to address some of the barriers in the community. Or it may be something that they are seeing over and over that it becomes part of their own planning objectives. So when we talk about the core independent living services, so again, this is the minimum requirement for every center for independent living, and there's around 400 of them across the country. They must provide information and referral services, so individuals can call in, ask questions, and be connected to other resources within the community, receive information. And this is something every center has to provide, and this is something that anyone can call into a center for. So individuals that you may be family, friends, other service providers, agencies, you can call in and receive information and referral services. The remaining services of the centers are required. It is required that they are being provided to individuals with significant disabilities. These services include independent living skills training. So this could be things such as working with somebody on learning how to budget, working with somebody on computer and technology things. That's something we've seen and heard a lot of this past year with everything that has transitioned to a virtual service. Peer counseling, and this includes the cross disability peer counseling. So allowing individuals to have that opportunity to be able to talk to somebody, like I said, that has that shared life experience, somebody who understands the issues and barriers that they might be facing. And the center can help link them with somebody who's worked through some of these things, who has gone through that road before. And something that I've seen in my work with centers for independent living, this has been a very valuable thing for individuals who may newly have acquired a disability, providing them the opportunity to talk and work with somebody who has had a disability for much longer, or even for life, that they can talk to and really show them, here's the things that I have been able to work through, here's the barriers that I've faced, and give them just that extra support as they go through. Because I think that's one thing as we look at, there are so many different types of organizations and services out there and in different programs. But when we look at disability specifically, it's the only population group that somebody can enter into at any point in time in their life. The next required service, individual and systems advocacy. So this could be working with an individual on an advocacy related thing, ensuring that they are receiving any types of benefits and services, helping them go through those steps. For those of you that are on here, oftentimes, a lot of these different programs, there's a lot of different hoops to jump through. There's a lot of barriers that are put in place to access something, looking at housing, how many steps you may have to go through as part of an application process for housing. So centers can work with individuals through different advocacy steps to make sure that their rights are being protected. From systems advocacy, if there is a larger scale issue within their community. So, a simple one could be that there's a public building that is not accessible. So the center can work within their community to ensure that those buildings and those facilities are becoming accessible, working with whoever runs that, whether it's some other program, a landlord, whatever it is, they can work on at systems level to help push that change. And then the centers all in 2014, when that last reauthorization went through that I talked about, it was transition services that were added. So it's transitioning from nursing homes or other facilities back into the community in less restrictive settings. Diversion, so helping individuals to not be entered into that institutional setting. And transition of youth to post-secondary life. So individuals that have left high school, working with them on what comes next, whether that's employment, further education, whatever that transition looks like to that youth. Because the centers are all about the individual being empowered to create their own goals, to decide their own path as they're moving forward. I covered that, so I'm going to skip it. So each SIL does adapt to their own local needs. So as things go forward in their community, each SIL can grow and adapt and expand to whatever they think is needed most in their community based on what they hear from individuals. So SILs can create additional services beyond those core services. They can work within that community in very different ways. So of the 12 centers for independent living here in Ohio, there are 12 very different organizations. They all provide different services. They have different impacts in the community, and it's based on what they know of from their community, what they have been able to work towards. Statewide Independent Living Council, and I realized, and Jackie, I will send you, I have a typo there. So there are 56 in the United States. So all 50 states, the 5 territories, and Washington, D.C., there are 56 of the statewide independent living councils. As of 1992, we are required to be submitting the state plan for independent living. Without that state plan, federal independent living funding would stop to the state. So some of the duties that we as the state council are required to participate in. So we have to develop the state plan for independent living in accordance with the guidelines developed by the federal government. The council shall monitor, review, and evaluate the implementation of that state plan on a regular basis. We must meet regularly and ensure that all of our meetings are open to the public and sufficient notice of those meetings is provided. The council shall submit reports to the administrator. So every year we do have an annual report that we have to submit in conjunction with the state of Ohio to the federal government. And as appropriate, we will coordinate activities with other entities in the state that provide services that are similar or complementary to independent living services. So we get to work with a lot of the other agencies and other statewide groups out there to promote independent living in either getting them to work with some of the projects that we are doing, getting involved with their projects, but really helping to promote that independent living philosophy and that purpose that I read earlier. There are a couple additional things that we are allowed to do as long as it's described in our state plan. And one of those is working with the Centers for Independent Living to coordinate services with public and private entities to improve services that are provided to individuals with disabilities. Conducting resource development activities to support the activities described in the state plan and or for the provision of independent living services by Centers for Independent Living, and perform other such functions consistent with the purpose of independent living. So this is that number 3, that other functions, that's our advocacy that we're allowed to engage in. An example here that kind of combines numbers 1 and 2 a little bit. In Ohio, we have been able to work with Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities on expanding the Youth Leadership Forum. So we now have 8 centers for independent living that have taken on that project through working with us as the state council and Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. So we're expanding that reach of really empowering youth with disabilities across the state. And so in looking at the authorities, we can coordinate work with the Centers for Independent Living because we don't want to overlap or take over anything that the SILs are doing within their service area. So if we were working on some type of education campaign or training program that we were providing, we would want to work with the centers to make sure that we are not overlapping or taking over what they're doing. We would not engage in any activities that constitute the direct provision of independent living services. So we as a council, we cannot provide direct services. That is completely prohibited for us. We are truly a statewide planning and advocacy organization. And with that, we must also comply with federal prohibitions against lobbying. So similar to the Centers for Independent Living, our council must be a majority of individuals with significant disabilities that do not work for Centers for Independent Living, do not work for the state of Ohio. We do have members that work for the state of Ohio, and one of them must be a representative from the designated state entity or Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. We must have individuals that provide statewide representation, and we must have individuals with a broad range of disabilities from diverse backgrounds, and they must be knowledgeable about Centers for Independent Living and independent living services. So as you can see, we do have a very strong board of directors from our statewide independent living council. We do try and get as much geographic spread as possible, but we do only have a total of 19 members. 14 of them are voting members. So with that, all of our council members must be appointed by the governor. So our 19 people are governor appointed council members. That's a requirement in the federal law. We do have, like I said, the non-voting members. Those are representatives from state agencies. People who cannot be included in that majority, if there's anyone who works for a Center for Independent Living, the state, even if there's a state employee, but they are not representing that state employment. So with that, we'll cover questions a little bit later, but that is a brief rundown of the Statewide Independent Living Council and Centers for Independent Living. And with that, I will pass it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Jeremy. And we will bring Lisa on the screen here so she can go through the services specifically from Services for Independent Living.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hold on.
Hold on. Jerry, can you see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lisa Marn.
Jerry.
And this is Sherry. Sherry is my personal care assistant.
Today.
And she will be repeating me today. This funny looking thing in my head is my head stick. This is how I type. As Jackie said, I'm the PCA LTSS Coordinator.
I've been great for years.
And I have been with SIL for 24 years.
So I
Say again. So I like this agency a lot. To give you a little bit of history, SIL became the first CIL in Ohio in 1980.
Three main counties.
There's a typo here. It should say SIL serves 3 main counties. Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga. We serve other counties for certain services, which I will address in a moment. SIL prides itself on providing excellent services both to individuals or consumers and the community. SIL is proud of our CARF accreditation. SIL's mission is
to empower lives to everything and management and
to empower persons with disabilities to lead inclusive lives through advocacy, community engagement, and self-directed services.
yeah, I mean, first about individual services.
I'm going to first talk about individual services.
And then we have one services we must provide.
As Jeremy said, we have 5 core services that we must provide.
These are information referral,
These are information and referral, advocacy, peer support, independent living skills training, and transition services.
I mean, services.
I'm going to briefly go through these services.
You don't know it. No.
If you have a question and you don't know where to go, call us. We receive calls about anything from housing, transportation, to resources, to personal care assistance.
If we do that, then we just and find the answer. Oh, you it clips the answer with
If we don't have the answer, we will research it and find out the answer for you, or direct you to someone better equipped to answer your question. The second one's advocacy.
On an individual level and it's level.
SIL does advocacy work on an individual level and systemic level.
If it's great and you need to advocate for yourself, you can hire you not do that.
If you have a situation and you need to advocate for yourself, we can guide you through how to do that.
I'm just saying everything in a moment.
I will address systemic advocacy in a moment.
It's an advocacy group called Advocacy.
SIL has a new advocacy group called Advocacy R Us, which means virtually. You can find more info on our website about that. Next, we have peer support.
Therefore, most of us
Over 51% of our staff have some type of disability. Therefore, most of us live and breathe disability issues.
a future program on the new staff with disabilities.
Our peer support programs are delivered by staff with disability.
Some services are done one-on-one, where considered close and staff supports and guide them and achieving them.
Some services are done one-on-one where consumers set their goals and staff supports and guides them in achieving them.
Other services are done groups, like
Other services are in groups like
ability eyes, which is a problem.
Abilities Are Us, which is a support group.
Lifestyle, which I look at as living healthy.
Healthy Lifestyles, which is a group that discusses living healthily.
Another one is nice love.
Another one is the Spice Club.
It's a virtual cooking love.
That is a virtual cooking club.
And we also have a good guy that is go.
We also have a group called Ready Youth Go.
It's a social group. It's important.
It's a social group for youth ages 14 to 22.
Then, oh, is for staff and consumers individually or in groups. News that influence their lives.
Independent Living Skills Training, or ILST, is a service where staff can teach consumers individually or in groups skills to better control and direct their lives.
That will be self-awareness,
Such skills can be self-awareness,
money management,
money management,
meal preparation,
meal preparation,
social skills,
social skills,
or communication.
healthy relationships, and communication.
There's many other topics too.
There's many other topics too.
The last
The last core service is transition.
and transition to ways. One is from nursing community living.
We do transition in two ways. One of them is transition from nursing home to a community-based living
Or
or an institution.
community. We would take problem like choice. The transition, including in the housing, the LTSS, and during the consumer
We work with state programs like Home Choice to facilitate a smooth transition, including finding housing, securing needed transition, secure needed household items, and ensuring the consumer has services at home to keep them safe and healthy.
we also work ages important to try to.
We also work with youth ages 14 to 22.
Who are transitioning from high school to adulthood.
They are transitioning from high school to adulthood.
The to make that transition.
And then we help them gain the skills that are needed to make that transition.
One program that is not a core service, but one that we provide.
One program that is not a core service, but we still provide,
Is it for the program?
the personal care assistance, or the PCA program.
It's a concept which opportunity for iron to dismiss or the within the program for the in Ohio.
SIL contracts with opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities, or OOD, to facilitate the PCA program for 32 counties in Ohio.
The PCA program in every Ohio looking for or training
The PCA program enables people who are either working, looking for work, or in training to hire their own PCAs.
It is a consumer-directed program.
It is a true consumer-directed program.
This is my favorite program.
This is my favorite program because Jackie and I run this program at SIL.
Community services.
Now I'll talk about community services. We have ADA and accessibility services.
Municipalities and nonprofits understand and comply with the ADA.
We assist businesses, municipalities, and nonprofits to understand and comply with the Americans with Disability Act, or the ADA.
We evaluate and assist with recommendations for barrier removal.
We do facility evaluations that can assist with recommendations for burial removal.
Now, I've mentioned advocacy before.
Now, I mentioned advocacy before.
I'm going to talk about advocacy instead of community basis
I'm going to talk about advocacy
and system
changes in the community basis.
Many rights staff are members of committees that work for system change to improve services and community life for people with disabilities.
Many of our staff are members of committees that work for system change to improve services and community life for people with disabilities.
Some rights on advocacy groups.
Some of us are on advocacy groups.
Surrounding topics like housing,
That's around topics like housing,
transportation,
long-term services and support,
community integration,
community integration,
and emergency prep.
and emergency prep.
We do community services that we're doing right now.
And we do community education like we're doing right now.
We do webinars.
We do a lot of webinars.
I encourage you to check out our website
So I encourage you to check out our
for
website
upcoming webinars.
for upcoming webinars.
We have a leadership academy.
We also have a leadership academy.
Members of board committees and coalitions.
That is a grant from the Developmental Disability Council to provide an 8-week training to people with disabilities to teach them how to be members on boards, committees, and coalitions.
Unfortunately, it's ending this year.
Unfortunately, the 5-year grant is ending this year.
It is a program.
It is a good program.
That's equipment program.
Last is our equipment program.
But it's a donation that we receive. We pay need and supplies that are constant supplies. We use orders, sends, promotes, salaries, etc. that people who need them.
Based on donations we receive, we provide needed equipment and supplies such as incontinence supplies, wheelchairs, walkers, canes, bedside commodes, shower benches, etc. to those people who need them.
It's the doctor's prescription and only way to
We ask for a doctor's prescription and that could be faxed to us.
and all donations must be dropped off
And all donations must be dropped off or picked up from us.
and I'll hand it over to you.
Jackie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. And we will take any questions right now for either Jeremy and or Lisa. And here is a question. What kind of responsibilities or roles do non-voting members have for OSILC, Jeremy?
That is a great question. So for our non-voting members, we have, like I said, opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities, Department of Transportation, Department of Developmental Disabilities, the Developmental Disabilities Council, and Job and Family Services. So we work with all of those members. They're active in our committees. They help provide us with information on what state policies are going on, what state programs are out there, and they really help to provide more information, as well as taking our information about what the Centers for Independent Living are doing, what independent living philosophy is, back to their own state agencies. So it's a way for us to coordinate and work within state government without being part of state government.
Wonderful. Any other questions for Jeremy or Lisa? You can enter them into the questions box. You guys must have done such a great job. Nobody has any questions. All right, what I'm trying to do here is pull up your contact information, and it's not cooperating with me. Of course not. And now on screen, can Lisa and Jeremy, can you see your information? Did I pull that up correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so on screen is contact information for both Jeremy and Lisa. If you think of any additional questions or down the road you think of something, please feel free to contact them. Their emails and phone numbers are listed, as well as the websites. And both OSILC and SIL have Twitter and Facebook pages, so feel free to find either one on Facebook or Twitter as well. And with that, let me check the questions box one more time here. And I don't see, let me check the chat box as well. Okay, I don't see anything else at the moment. So we will go ahead and give everybody a few more minutes back in their afternoon. And I'd like to thank Jeremy for joining us and Lisa. And everybody have a great day. And don't forget about the survey that's going to pop up once we end our session here. Thank you.